I heard my son scream, so I put on my earplugs. It was 8:15 on a warm Tuesday night, and he was on the other side of the locked gate, hitting the metal with the flat of his hand and yelling for me to come down and open it. I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark and pushed the little foam plugs in and then pressed my palms over my ears on top of them, which tells you everything about how much I trusted myself. I want to be honest about what kind of mother I was that night. I was not calm and I was not strong. I was a grown woman hiding in a dark room from an 11-year-old boy, because I knew that if I listened to him for one more minute, I would go down and unlock that gate and undo the only thing that had ever worked on him. My father was awake the whole time. He sat in his chair by the front window with the lamp off, and he stayed there until 6 in the morning watching my son sleep on the bench under the mango tree. And at 6 he walked out and turned the key and said good morning like nothing had happened at all. That was the night things started to turn. But the real reason my son was the way he was had been sitting in a folder at his school for 2 years, and nobody had thought to hand it to me. My son is named Enzo. He was 11 that year, and he had decided somewhere along the way that rules were a thing other people did. He talked back to teachers. He was rude to neighbors. At home he did nothing I asked, and I mean nothing. If I said clean your plate, he left it on the floor to prove a point. If I said bedtime, he stayed on his phone until the birds started. When I took the phone, he screamed until the walls rang, and I always gave it back because I worked 10 hours a day and I did not have another fight in me. It had been the two of us since he was a baby, and I was losing, and I knew I was losing. One night after a fight that lasted 2 hours over a plate of rice, I sat on the bathroom floor with the door locked and called my father. I said I could not do this by myself anymore. He said, come home, but if you come, we do it my way with the boy. My father raised me alone too. He was strict, but he was fair, and he never once put a hand on me. He just meant what he said and never took it back, which as a child I found unbearable, and as an adult I found miraculous. We moved in that weekend with 4 bags and a rice cooker. Enzo hated it inside the first hour. He said this house is boring. There is no signal in my room. I am not staying here. My father said there is internet in the living room where I can see you, and in your room you sleep. That is the rule. Enzo said you cannot tell me what to do. You are not my dad. My father said no, I am not. I am your grandfather, and this is my house. And in my house there are rules. You do not have to like them. You only have to follow them. The first week was open war. Enzo left his plate on the floor the way he always did with me, and my father did not shout and did not sigh and did not pick it up. He just said, you do not eat again until that plate is washed and put away. Enzo said then I will not eat. My father said, that is your choice. Enzo went to his room hungry and slammed the door hard enough to shake the windows, and I stood in the hall holding a bowl of food I wanted to bring him, and my father said, he will not starve from one dinner, but he will learn that his choices have a size. By morning, Enzo had washed the plate without a word and eaten enough breakfast for 3 people, furious the entire time, but he did it. Every rule went the same way. My father said it once, plainly, and then never argued about it again. Enzo tried everything that had ever worked on me. He screamed, and my father waited him out and said, when you are done we can talk like people. I do not answer screaming. So Enzo stopped screaming at him, because it did nothing, and turned it all on me instead. He would corner me by the counter and tell me I had ruined his life, that I was a bad mother, that I had dragged him to a prison because I could not handle my own child. And I am not going to pretend it did not work. It worked every time. I would start to fold, and every time my father would walk in quietly and say, you do not speak to your mother that way, go to your room. Enzo would go. But he would look at me on the way out like he had won something because he had. At dinner he told my father this food is trash. I am not eating it. My father said then do not eat it, but you do not insult the person who cooked for you. So say thank you or say nothing. Enzo said nothing for 2 days. On the 3rd day he mumbled a thank you into his plate, and my father passed him more rice. And that was the end of it. No speech, no victory lap. I kept waiting for my father to explode because I would have exploded by then. He never did. When Enzo broke a rule, my father did not stack 10 new punishments on top of it. He held one line, the same line, every single time. Enzo got sneaky. He lifted the phone off the living room table at midnight when he was sure everyone was asleep, and my father said from the dark chair, put it back and go to bed. Enzo said you are spying on me. My father said, I am sitting in my own house. Bed. Then came the night of the gate and the earplugs, and after that he stopped sneaking out, but he did not soften, not one bit. He tested my father every day for a month, and every day my father was exactly the same, and I got so tired that I started thinking about going back to our old apartment and our old chaos, because at least there, my son did not look at me like I was his jailer. My father told me, you are waiting for a big moment where he suddenly changes. There is no big moment. There is the same small answer given 1,000 times until one day he believes it. Do not quit on the 900th. He said the boy is not bad. He is only used to winning, and a child who always wins is secretly frightened because it means nobody around him is strong enough to hold him. Then something small cracked open. Enzo came home from school one afternoon upset in a way I had not seen before. Not angry upset. A bigger boy had been pushing a smaller kid around at the gate, and Enzo had stepped between them and told him to stop, and the teacher on duty had scolded Enzo for making a scene. He was fuming, and he clearly expected my father to lecture him about school rules. Instead, my father listened to the whole story without interrupting and then said, you did the right thing. Standing in front of someone smaller than you is never trouble. I am proud of you. Enzo did not know what to do with that. He went quiet for the rest of the night. Not the angry quiet, a different one. And I caught him looking at my father across the dining table, like he was trying to solve a puzzle. After that, the small things started. He washed his plate maybe 3 nights out of 5, which sounds like nothing until you know that before it was 0. He stopped hiding in his room to do homework and started bringing his notebook to the living room table where my father sat reading, not to talk, just to be in the same room as another human being. The screaming faded out like he had forgotten how, and one evening he got stuck on a math problem, erasing the same line over and over, pressing harder each time, and instead of throwing the notebook, he carried it over and dropped it in front of my father and said, I do not get this. Not please help me. Just that. My father did not make it a moment. He pulled the notebook closer and said, this part here is where you went off. Let me show you. And he walked him through it with the point of a pencil, and Enzo said, oh, okay, and took it back and finished the rest alone. I was at the sink holding a dish towel and my eyes were burning, because my son had asked an adult for help out loud, and he had not done that since he was small. So of course that is when I ruined it. I got comfortable. I decided the hard part was behind us. And when Enzo came to me one night before bed and said, Mom, can I have my phone in my room? I just want music while I fall asleep. I said, sure, that is fine. Without hesitating, without asking my father, without without even thinking about asking him. It felt like such a small kindness. I went to bed feeling like a good mother, which should have been my warning. The next morning, Enzo came out for breakfast with his eyes red and swollen from screen light in the dark, moving like his body weighed twice what it did, and my father looked at him for a long moment and then turned and looked at me. Not at Enzo, at me. He said quietly, "Did you give him the phone for his room?" I said yes. He wanted music. My father nodded slowly and said, "Then you took the legs out from under everything we built this month." He said it the way you say the sky is blue. Not loud, not cruel, just true. And that was worse than anger, because anger I could have fought. Enzo watched all of it, and I saw something come on behind his eyes. That sharp, calculating look I knew too well. The look of a boy who has just found a crack and is deciding how to get his fingers into it. At lunch, when it was only the two of us, he said, "See, even Grandpa thinks you mess everything up. You cannot do anything right." Casual, like small talk, perfectly aimed. Then he walked away, and the worst part is that a piece of me agreed with him. After that, it fell apart fast. He went to me in private and said, "Grandpa's rules are too much, Mom. Even you think so. You gave me the phone because you know he is being unfair." Then he went to my father and said, "Mom told me she thinks your rules are too strict. She only goes along with it to keep the peace." He fed each of us a version of the other that was close enough to true to swallow, and it worked on me. I got defensive when my father brought up the rules. I started second-guessing whether he was too hard. My father got quieter, not because he was fooled, but because he could see me wobbling, and he was trying to steady me without shoving. Everything we had built evaporated inside 3 days. The door slamming came back. The plate on the table came back. He talked back at dinner and then looked at me like he was daring me to choose a side. He was not just defiant anymore, he was confident, because he had found the weak point in the system, and the weak point was me. I could not even be angry at him for it. He was 11, and he was doing what had always worked. I was the one who handed him the opening. That night, after he went to bed, my father sat me down at the dining table and said, "You are not his friend, you are his mother. He has enough friends, and he has one mother. Do the harder job." I lay awake until the light came up. In the morning, I made breakfast and told my father I wanted to talk to Enzo alone, and he picked up his coffee and went out to the yard without a word, and I loved him for that. When Enzo sat down, I said, "I made a mistake giving you the phone. That was mine, not your grandfather's. I broke a rule because I wanted you to like me for 5 minutes." He stopped chewing. I said, "And I know what you have been doing. Telling me one thing and telling him another, trying to make us fight so you can do what you want." His face went completely still. He said, "I do not know what you are talking about," in that flat voice he used to buy time. I said, "Yes, you do, and it stops today." He pushed back from the table and went for the throat. He said, "You always take his side. You brought me to this prison, and now you are his puppet." He says, "Jump and you jump. You do not even think for yourself anymore." A month before, that would have worked. It still landed. I felt it land, because puppet was the exact word for the thing I was already afraid of. But I did not move, and I did not soften my voice, and I did not add a honey at the end to make it easier for him. I said, "I brought you here because I love you too much to let you become someone nobody can stand to be near." He opened his mouth and closed it again. He was looking for the angle, and for the first time he could not find one because I was not asking him for anything. He ate the rest of his breakfast and left for school. That afternoon I heard the front door and his backpack hitting the floor in the doorway, and his footsteps going past it toward his room. I came around the corner and said, "Pick it up and put it where it goes." He stopped and turned and looked at me, and I knew it was a test, and he knew I knew. He stood there waiting for me to say never mind. I did not say anything else. 5 seconds. 10. Then he walked back, picked it up, put it away, and closed his door without slamming it. I went back to the counter and pressed my hands flat against it because they were shaking too hard to hold anything. It was the first time in his entire life that I had told my son to do something, watched him resist, and not folded. My father had been watching from the hallway. That evening he said, "That was good. The backpack. Now do it again tomorrow. And the day after, he will test you 20 more times to see if you meant it." I asked him how he stayed so calm when I was small, because I did not feel calm. I felt like I was acting. He said, "I was not calm. I was terrified every day. I sat in that same chair every night after you slept and wondered if I was ruining you." Then he said, "I just decided that being scared was not a good enough reason to stop being your father." 2 weeks of steadiness followed. Not peace exactly, but something close. Then there was a school field trip, a nature walk at a park, and I signed up as a parent volunteer. While the kids did their scavenger hunt, the parents stood around by the rest area, and a woman with sunglasses pushed up on her head looked down the trail at Enzo and asked if he was mine. I said yes. She tilted her head the way people do when they are placing a face and said, "He looks just like his father." Then she said she used to work with him years ago. Small world. And smiled, because to her it was nothing. Enzo was maybe 15 feet away. He had stopped walking. His shoulders were up by his ears, and his hands were fists at his sides. And he stood like that for 3 full seconds before he caught up with his partner and did not look back. He would not look at me on the bus. When we got home, he walked past my father in the living room, went into his room, and closed the door so quietly that the click of the latch was louder than any slam he had ever thrown. He did not eat dinner. He sat with his hands in his lap and stared at the table. 2 days went by like that. He followed every rule perfectly. He washed his plate, put his bag away, made curfew, did his homework at the table. A stranger would have called him the best behaved child alive, but his eyes were flat and switched off, and the almost smiles were gone with everything else. A child who screams is still fighting. A child who goes silent has started to give up. It scared me more than the noise ever had. On the Thursday, I had a conference at the school that had been on the calendar for a month, one of those 15-minute slots in a hallway lined with plastic chairs. His teacher shook my hand, and then she did not start with grades. She put a thick manila folder on the desk between us and slid it across. She said, "Before we talk about anything else, I think you should see this, and I am sorry it took me this long to put it in your hands." Inside were his writing assignments, 14 of them, going back 2 full years, each one date stamped in the corner by the school office. The first was from 3rd grade. The prompt was write a letter to someone you miss. He had written 11 lines to a man he had never met, asking where he lived and whether he was tall. The next was a family tree worksheet with one branch left completely empty and the words, "I do not know," written across it in pencil 3 times, pressed hard enough to dent the page. Then a poem assignment about home. Then a personal narrative called The Man Who Left, which the teacher had marked with a small note that said, "Please see me," and he never had. Under all of it was his discipline log, printed, with the dates. She had gone through and marked them. Every single referral he had ever received, every outburst, every shouting match, fell within 4 days of an assignment about family. Everyone. 2 years of it, in his handwriting, sitting in a drawer in a building I dropped him off at every morning. I sat in that plastic plastic chair and read my son's handwriting, asking the same question 14 different ways, and I understood that he had not been fighting me. He had been asking me. He had been asking for 2 years in the only place anyone gave him paper for it, and nobody had ever carried the question to the one person who had the answer. She told me one more thing. She said the week before, after the field trip, the neighbor whose window he had broken with a ball had called the school to say the boy had come to his door on his own, without being sent, and offered to clean the yard as extra payment, and had spent an hour raking and pulling weeds, and then said thanks and walked home. I drove back with that folder on the passenger seat, and I did not turn on the radio. That night, I was washing dishes when I felt someone behind me. Enzo was in the doorway in his pajamas, hair flat on one side, face blank, and eyes full of something I could not name. He said, "Where is my dad?" Not angry. Small. The voice of a boy who has been carrying a stone in his pocket for years and has finally found somewhere to set it down. I turned off the water and dried my hands and sat, and I told him the truth. His father left before his first birthday. He was not a monster. He was young and frightened, and when it got hard, he chose to leave instead of stay. I do not know where he is now. No number, no address, no city. Enzo listened without moving. Then he said, "Did he ever ask about me?" I could have softened it. I did not. I said, "No." His chin shook once, and he pressed his lips together and got hold of it. Then he said, and his voice broke in the middle of it, "Then why am I like this? Why am I angry all the time?" I put the folder on the table and opened it and turned it toward him and said, "You are not angry all the time. You are angry in October and in May and the week of the family tree, and I have the dates. It was never a mystery. It was a question, and I am the one who never answered it, and I am sorry." He looked at his own handwriting for a long time. He did not cry. He said, "They kept these." I said, "They kept all of them." 3 days later, on a Saturday morning, he came out of his room holding a piece of notebook paper folded in half. He stood at the edge of the room like he was not sure he was allowed in, and he said, "I wrote something. Can I read it?" My father set down his cup and folded his hands and waited. Enzo unfolded the paper, and his hands were shaking hard enough that it made a soft rattling sound. It was in pencil with places rubbed out and written over. He read the title first, like a heading. "Things I am sorry for." Then, "I am sorry I said this food is trash. I am sorry I called Mom a bad mother. I am sorry I broke the window and lied. I am sorry I tried to make you and Mom fight." His jaw was working. "I am sorry I said I hated you, Grandpa." His voice split on the word hated. He kept going anyway. At the bottom there was a gap and then 2 more lines, read slower. "I used to think being loud meant being strong, but Grandpa never yells, and he is the strongest person I know." He folded the paper back along the same crease and stood there looking at the floor. My father pushed his chair back and crossed the room and put both hands on his shoulders and waited until the boy looked up and said, "A man who can say he was wrong is braver than a man who never makes a mistake. I was proud of you before this list, and I will be proud of you after." Enzo's face came apart all at once, and he pressed it into my father's shirt and grabbed 2 fistfuls of it and cried the way you cry when it comes from somewhere with no bottom. I put my arms around both of them. He reached back without looking and took hold of my sleeve and did not let go. When he finally stepped away, his face was blotchy and he wiped it on the hem of his shirt and said, "Do not tell anyone I cried." My father said, "If you want it private, it stays private. That is a promise." Then Enzo looked at me, open, none of the calculation left in it, and said, "Mom, I do not think you are a bad mother. I think you are the only person who never stopped trying with me." He is out at the fence now, hammer in his right hand, 3 nails held in his teeth. He does not know I am watching.